Jay's Den. Some of you have seen this already, others have not. I gotta tell you, I'd rather 10 below and no wind than that wind. I live in Montana and it's cold, but that's as cold as it's been walking around in that. So hopefully that goes away. Roger says it's going away. Bless it.
Oh, my rep can't hear you.
Okay.
Can you get closer to the mic?
It said barely, so.
Barely,
Yeah.
okay. I will get closer. How about now?
Better.
Okay, great. Well, welcome to day 3 of BIM week. I'm gonna briefly talk about JSTAN. Ignore the AED 30 logo on there. I couldn't figure out how to get it off this PowerPoint. Anyway, I'm going to give a little update of JSTAN, as I said, and I'm going to introduce the rest of the group this morning, or at least Will, who's up behind me. I do want to point out Ian Howell from Building Smart USA is in the room, and thanks for coming in. Do I point this here?
Yes. No, does it work?
Uh-oh.
Tech issues. Here you go.
Thank you. All right, a quick history of JSTAN, and it's been a few years, as you can see, but I'm not going to read that to you, but it stemmed from a Nashville resolution. And I just want to share a little bit about the history of the committee, because there's a lot of you who have been involved in this journey much longer than I have. And I don't think Henry in particular has a long history and was central to getting this going, as are several others. So part of JSTAN, the idea behind JSTAN was that overarching cross-discipline participation and engagement in digital delivery and open BIM. So the resolution came out in 19. COVID got in the way of things, and we kind of reloaded and re-energized a year and a half ago. And I want to talk a little bit about what's.
They can barely hear you online.
Okay. How about now? A little better? Okay.
Which means you can come out from behind the podium and see what you're doing.
I'll advance them.
Thank you. I'll go like this when I'm ready. So the mission is to champion and coordinate implementation of open data standards. I think we all understand the premise behind that. And as I said before, the cross-cutting nature of this. I'm going to get to the committee members, and here are the committee members. The states they represent aren't on there because they didn't fit very well on the slide, but you can see there are people from several committees: construction, design, bridges and structures, performance-based management, and CDMA, the Committee on Data Management and Analytics. And the resolution stated the chair and the vice chair would come from the Committee on Data Management and Analytics, hence my role in this committee. And then there are several AASHTO staff who are providing support for this. Penelope and Weinberger in particular has done a lot of work to get us where we are today, so I want to thank Penelope.
You're welcome.
the goals that we put together here, and these are a work in progress. We're going to talk about this. Our committee is going to meet Friday. I'm going to talk about the Friday logistics. I don't know that it's crystal clear in the agenda, but I'll clarify that for everybody on what's going on Friday. JSTAN has not met in person yet. We of course had a plan to meet in September, and that didn't go well. And really wanted to get the group together in person to talk about the specifics of what we intend to accomplish and what the scope of the committee is, and really the intent is to use this BIM week to kind of springboard into what we hope to accomplish. Some of that's hard to do with a lot of virtual meetings, so having most of the committee here in person face to face is going to help that. And it's also going to help having heard all of the conversations that took place over the course of the week. So this is a great opportunity for JSTAN to get engaged and really start to run with this and figure out how we can support and help the activities of the various groups that are involved. Quickly, we have a website, and it's hopefully the intent is it's not a static website. It's updated as things change and new content is added. So we want to keep it fresh with the activities that we're working on, so people have a place to go to understand a little bit more about JSTAN, what we're doing, and where we're headed. Just quickly about the various roles within Building Smart, and Will is going to give an overview of Building Smart, so you all understand a little bit more about it. But right now there are 3 roles in connection with Building Smart. One is the Building Smart International person, that would be Mike Kennerly, and the second one is the chair of and kind of co-chair of the Roads and Bridges Industry Committee. That's the chair of the JSTAN committee, Mike, me, and Will Sharp is the other co-chair. And there's another role right now where the asset operations handover, and Bill Pratt is taking on that role. Thanks, Bill. And the other thing that's been going on, as I mentioned, Penelope is funding the membership for Building Smart. We have a short-term solution to fund our membership in Building Smart. Thanks to the Ashtower group who have stepped up and helped with that. But the long-term funding is to have something sustainable in place, and there's what's called a technical services program as part of the Committee on Data Management and Analytics that will be presented to the AASHTO Leadership Committee in Seattle in May, and hopefully I anticipate that TSP will be fully funded. It includes the membership for Building Smart, among other data-related activities, and that'll provide a sustainable funding source for our membership in Building Smart International. So more on that in May. The other current activity is the meeting, the summit in Rome, and what we're doing this morning is input into that, and Mike Kennerly will be there to present the USA position on that. And of course, this workshop here that we're all participating in. And then Friday, we're going to kind of start to nail down what we're going to do, what we hope to accomplish in the coming years, and what our goals are. So, and finally, I don't know if Will is going to talk about the regional workshops, but part of today is what I anticipate is an annual event where we're gathering input into the USA roadmap as our other parts of the world, and our position and our investment in the Building Smart strategic direction is of course very important, in trying to get the input from all of the key players is one of the intents of the workshop this morning. This one is a little bit thrown together quickly. We just didn't have time to take this on the way we wanted to, but nonetheless, with the Rome Summit coming up in March, we wanted to provide what input we could. So it's an important workshop. I think Mike Kennerly talked early in the session about the interactive part. That's what today's session is a lot about. So please speak up and participate as Jim Bloom and others lead us through this exercise. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Will Sharp, co-chair.
Thanks a lot, Mike. It's been great working with Stan and kind of getting this sorted out and how to integrate Asheville with Building Smart, and a lot of good progress there. I'm gonna switch the presentation real quick.
And I have too many. This one?
I guess that's that. Okay, so like Mike said, I'm going to give a quick overview of Building Smart and just a little prep for the workshop before we move on to that. Oh, there it is. Sorry, it's not showing. So first I want to talk about this industry digital transformation. And I mean, you've heard it in the last few days at this meeting, a lot of change going on. You know, digital delivery, digital workflows, modelless legal document, open data standards, digital as-bills. You know, we're really going through a major transformation. And my opinion is data standardization is really foundational to that. You know, to get those reliable, consistent data exchanges, to provide that interoperability that we're all after between all the groups. You know, we really need to focus on data standardization. So that's a lot of what we're going to talk about this morning with the workshop. So, and this is a vision that many of us have. You know, where are we going with this? It's really that vision of trying to leverage the data throughout the entire project lifecycle. You know, how do we tie this together? We've been doing a great job with, you know, digital information design. A lot of people moving to 3D, moving to the new tools, but how do we tie it together across the entire life cycle? All the way through to the contractors, to the fabricators, and the asset management. And we do think openBIM and open data standards is really one of the foundational keys to do that, to fully achieve that. So one of the keys to that is Building Smart International, and how they fit into this. One way is they're the international organization that maintains openBIM and maintains the IFC standard. And at Building Smart International, we are open, neutral, nonprofit, and international. And these are some of the areas that Building Smart International works in. So we do have chapters that are across the globes, you know, including the Building Smart USA chapter. We have a number of summits, and this is at the international level. Like we mentioned earlier, we've got a summit in the next few weeks in Rome. There's 2 of those a year. There's also summits at the kind of the national and the regional level. You know, I can tell you with Building Smart USA, we plan on 3 or 4 regional summits throughout the US this year. In Florida, in Utah, in Chicago. So there'll be more information on that, but lots of ways to plug in there. Of course, being a nonprofit, we got to have sponsors. We've got to have member support as well. You know, we've got to have partners. So that's a key part of it. And then also a lot of the data that we do is geared toward the users, the standards, and compliance. So kind of looking at Building Smart International, and a lot of it is driven by the industry. What does the industry need? You know, identifying those specific use cases the industry needs, making sure we develop the standards to meet those use cases, and also helping with the compliance side as well. How do we make sure that our software vendors are compliant with those standards, that they have those reliable exchanges? How do we help with professional certification as well, and compliance of our staff? So this is, in a nutshell, a lot of the areas that Building Smart does, the different areas, but they're all very important. They're all interrelated. And I know I heard a question on Monday, you know, what about IFC? Is IFC sustainable? You know, how does that compare to TransXML, you know, the work that was previously done? And this is an example of around the globe, all the mandates that we have with IFC. You know, this is just not a US thing. This is a global thing. You know, there's countries that are around the world that are mandating IFC and openBIM, and we're really all working together in a common scheme. So this is one I think we have great great sustainability, and Building Smart's helping us out with that long-term governance as well at this IFC scheme. So that's some key differences, I think, with IFC versus where we were with TransXML. And I know one of the recent ones up in the corner here is Finland, is considering legislation to require IFC for their permitting in January of 2025. So that's just one example. But we're seeing more and more, every time I use this slide, it seems like Ian throws up a few more countries or a few more areas where they're mandating IFC. There's just a lot of interest, a lot of momentum here around the globe. And one of the things, Building Smart, how to get involved. I can tell you, it's been great working with Building Smart. They're very much a global network. And definitely, if you have interest, we want your help. A lot of the work we do is volunteer effort in the rooms, working on the standards. So that's one, a lot of different ways to plug in. I know in the Building Smart USA chapter, we have like the Roads and Bridges Industry Committee that Mike and I are co-chairing. There's also a technical committee for IFC. There's also an education committee. So, like I said, if you have interest, we'd be more than happy to plug you in. We have a separate aviation group, a separate buildings group. So lots of ways to plug in depending on your interest in there. And I suggest you consider, joining the U.S. chapter, getting involved with the U.S. chapter, serving on committee, just tying into that Building Smart ecosystem. So one of the things I wanted to share, and I think, Alexa, you might have touched on this a little bit on Monday, but what's our vision on this? What's our vision? Okay, let's say we put all this effort in open data standards. We develop these standards for the exchanges. My view is this is going to change how we work. What I see is that the engineer is going to be able to choose whatever software they choose to really fit the needs of the project. And their deliverable to the owner is going to be an IFC file that has everything you need to estimate and build that project. So that's one way I see this changing, is that, and the owner is going to use that IFC file to actually advertise the project. I see the contractors being able to seamlessly import this data, to use in their software for cost estimating and for and to help with automated construction. And I also see at the end of construction, the contractors giving us some type of openBIM data to carry on for our digital as-builts. And that carries into asset management. So we're really trying to eliminate that data loss that we see at every step. Today we just see that data loss. We do all this great digital design, and what happens? We translate it to plans. We lose all that data, start over again. Contractor typically develops models. They have all this great digital data, but it dies in construction, doesn't carry forward. So we're really trying to carry that data out through the life cycle. So I think Alexa had a similar slide to this. I just want to emphasize, I've seen a lot of progress to date on this. I think, like Mike mentioned, the AASHTO adopting the IFC schema, I think that sent a message to the software vendors and really all of us that, hey, we're serious about this. This is the way we're going. The formation of JSTAN, I think, has been critical. And also, I can tell you the bridge guys, one of the projects I'm working on is the BIM for Bridges and Structures Pool Fund. We talked about this Monday, but then to develop a standard and ballot it and adopt it by AASHTO, that's another key foundational step. Again, sends a very strong message to the vendors, really the full industry. This is the way we're going. So I wanted to touch on this too. How do we see AASHTO working with Building Smart? And I can tell you for probably a couple of years, I've had many discussions, and Ian Howe has as well, with Mike Mosselman, with Mike Kennerly, and really, thinking this through carefully. And Mike, I know you touched on this on yours, Mike Kennerly is going to be the Building Smart International rep. He's going to serve on the Infra Room Steering Committee. So he's representing us in Rome. So that's critical. I really appreciate, Mike Mosselman, your help with the Roads and Bridges Industry Committee with the U.S. As the chart shows, we really see this committee is a way to collaborate with all the activities, with the BIM for Infrastructure Pool Fund, the BIM for Bridges Pool Fund, the JTCES work. There's so much going on. We really want to streamline that collaboration work that through Building Smart USA and Building Smart International. So that's the way we see that working. And I also want to emphasize there's two levels that AASHTO is working with Building Smart International. You know, one is the operations level that's working in the rooms, like the info room, but there also is a role there on the governance side. With AASHTO's principal membership in Building Smart International, they do have voting rights for the schema, you know, and for some of those critical elements. So that really helps to ensure that the U.S. interests are considered, you know, the scheme is going to work for our needs as well as everyone else's needs as well. So it's really rolled with the operations side as well as the governance side. I also wanted to touch on the contractors and the American Road Transportation Builders Association. They came out in May of 21 with this digital construction policy statement that they went online, you know, they went on record as saying, we support model as legal document. We support open data standards. And I think this is huge. You know, we've got to coordinate with the industry. We've got to get them on board, but that ARPTA sees the value. You know, they definitely see the value to this. They understand getting the digital data in a format they can use and leverage is going to help them out as well. So I am seeing some good industry collaboration and some good momentum there as well. And then today's workshop, I want to talk about this for just a minute. You know, why are we here? What are we trying to achieve? You know, the timing on this meeting was just perfect. You know, it's a couple of weeks before the Rome Summit. And one of the discussion items at the Rome Summit is where is the Building Smart International infra room going? You know, what is their strategic roadmap? What are their priorities for the next 5 years? So, and Building Smart has done workshops similar to what we're going to do this morning with 5 different countries. So they've already got input from 5 different countries. You know, what are their priorities? Priorities are different, right, for every country. So we're really fortunate to have Jim Plume here today. Jim facilitated the Australian workshop. You know, he's very familiar. I know you were co-chair of the info room, Jim. I had the opportunity to meet Jim at the Montreal International Summit last fall. And I'm really pleased to have him here. I thought, Jim, you were the perfect person to do this workshop. So I appreciate you coming from Australia. And I appreciate FHWA's support to help get Jim here to the meeting today. But we're really looking forward to bringing you up to speed. You know, what was the last roadmap for the info room? You know, what was discussed at these other country workshops? And really, we're going to use Mentimeter to get your input. What's important to you? You know, how would you prioritize these items? Are we missing any items? So we really want to have an interactive discussion this morning, get your input. And the way this is going to work is we're going to get your input today. I know, Mike, we're going to talk about this some on Friday at the JSTAN meeting. And then we're trying to prepare this packet of information for Mike Kennerly to take to Rome and present our input at the Building Smart International Summit in Rome. So that's the plan today. But yeah, the 5 countries, by the way, Germany, Finland, Australia, and Sweden and Italy were the other 5 that were done. But with that, Jim, if you'd like to come up and help us out there, we'd appreciate that. We also have Alexa Mitchell in the room here to help with the in-person facilitation. So she'll be passing the mic around and helping us there. And we do have Jeff Ouellette. He is online and he's really there to help represent our online audience and help facilitate with them as well. So with that, Jim, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much for that introduction and also the invitation to be here. While my slides are coming up, I've been a member of the Building Smart Info Room Steering Committee now for several years. Recently, I have to say, going back in time, I've always been actively helping the Info Room to establish its plans going forward in 5-year blocks or 3-year blocks sometimes. And more recently, I've guided the process of developing a roadmap, as Will has said, for the next 5 years. And this is still a work in progress. This workshop today is a part of that process, and I'm very keen to try and get you all to participate, both the people who are here in the room, of course, and those who are with us remotely online. And so my task is to encourage you to come up with ideas. And the way I'm going to guide that, and I'll go through the slide in a second, in more detail of it, is to introduce you first in the next 40 minutes or so, to go through and introduce you to what we've already got on the table as a result of those 5 workshops and the process that we've gone through. And then when you understand that process, we're going to then look at the key initiatives or activities that came out of that process up to this moment. And so it sort of forms the draft, if you like, or the beginnings of the roadmap as it stands at the moment and presented at the upcoming summit in 4 months' time, along with your ideas coming out of this activity today. And so it's really important that you get engaged. You need to sort of cope with listening to me for the 40 minutes so to understand the context, and I'll try and make that as clear as possible. But then after morning tea, it's going to be over to you. All I'll be doing is identifying some of the issues that have already been identified, getting your response to those, and also, more importantly, perhaps, getting your further ideas, things that you want to put on the table, which we can take back to the steering committee and have further to build the roadmap further. So, where are we? Yes, so this is me. This is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give a brief introduction to Building Science International, the infra room in particular, building, I hope, on what's already been presented by others. I'm then going to give a quick recap on the roadmap up to last year. That's one slide, so it's not a very quick recap. I'm going to then talk about the activity streams that we identified as being the work that the builders should do, and we're going to ask for your feedback on that. Then I'm going to go through and explain the way we operated the chapter workshops and what came out of that, what we've then done with that information to consolidate it, and how those ideas might fit into it, and show you how those ideas might fit into a preliminary roadmap. Well, it's not really a roadmap quite as yet, and then of course get your feedback. So bear with me for the next 35 minutes, hopefully now, and let's get this moving forward. So you already sort of understand some of this, I think, but I want to elaborate this a little bit. Basically, Building Smart International is a community. It's a community of chapters, and you can see all the chapters around the world there. I represent the little one in the bottom right-hand corner, Australasia, in my spare time. I should say I'm actually retired, and so this is my life is revolves around 2 things. One is grandkids, the other is building smart, both national and international. So that's why I'm here. Next one.
Just the analog.
There you go.
I think I'm just, yes, thank you. Maybe I should just get okay. So these are the BSI members, and notice that we managed to squeeze diversity in the bottom right-hand corner, so we've updated this list. So we've now, these are all the member organisations. So between the chapters and the member organisations, that provides the forms of the community, which we call Building Science International. Next one. The Building Science is led or managed through executive leadership, mainly through the room steering committees. And so there are 4 dot points there on the room steering committees. A room steering committee represents international community of experts. So I'm an expert because I'm on the steering committee by definition. Thank you. It also determines its role is to understand and determine what the digital requirements are for that domain, in our case, the infrastructure room. So it's not what a room is. It's a very strange concept. Building Science International divides itself up into rooms, which the rooms should be just a domain of interest. And we'll see a bit more of that in a minute. We developed a charter for each room. We did that a few years ago for infrastructure, and roadmap to plan how we should proceed. At this point in time, we've come to sort of a threshold. We've completed the work to develop what's become known as the IFC 4.3 extensions to IFC for infrastructure that covers roads, rail, bridges, not quite tunnels, but that's on the way, and also ports and waterways. So we've got this sort of baseline extensions to IFC for infrastructure, which is now on the table. That's been the work for the last 5-6 years. And now we're taking stock. Where do we go to from here? And that's why we're running this workshop. And of course, we have a scheduled delivery of those workshops. Next one. I probably should have said actually the rail room is actually a separate room. They focused on the rail development, but that work they did in collaboration with us in the infrastructure room, and that's part of IT. So these are the steering committees. Next one, and that's the steering committee for infrastructure, just to highlight those are the current members of the steering committee, although we've just had an election. I haven't heard the result of the election yet, but there'll be a few new places there. Next one. Just quickly, it's important to understand the standards development process that Building Smart goes through. I'll go through that very, very quickly. We divide up into 3 phases. There's the initiation phase, then there's the development phase, and approval phase, and then there's deployment. I guess it's 4. But at initiation, that's what comes out of the room. So several years ago now, the infrastructure room determined that we needed to start to develop extensions for IFC. There was a working group established to plan that work. We drafted a proposal, it went to the standards committee of Building Smart, and then became established as a project. The project then runs through a development phase over several years, a few years, and once it's delivered, we have what's called a candidate standard. So it develops a draft standard that becomes a candidate standard when it's approved by the standards committee. And once you've done that, then that then goes through a software implementation and testing phase before deployment. So it's a fairly rigorous process. By the end of that process, we have a final standard, which is being tested by implementers. It's being designed by experts through a very comprehensive process. And then concurrently, it's gone to ISO for its endorsement to become ISO standard. And it's not clear exactly when that will happen, but it hopefully will happen this year. Maybe almost by the middle of the year for that one. So that's what the process looks like. Next one. And that's governed, this is a kind of repetitive thing, but it's governed by the standards committee, which has an executive and a technical executive. It's initiated through the rooms, so these are the rooms, it's infrastructure room, and it goes through the process I just described. And so the projects are not just managed through a process, but also governed through the structure. And the standards committee has played a key role in that. Next. I'm happy to answer any questions, by the way. If you want to dive in and ask a question, we can do that. The other thing I want to talk about briefly is the compliance program, which was referred to by Will a few minutes ago, but it consists of 2 parts, the professional certification and software certification. We don't need to, I'm not going to focus on that in this presentation because it's just a process that happened and is currently being organised through Building Smart. certification process for IC 4.3. But what we do want to focus on briefly is professional certification, which is a Building Smart International initiative to help demonstrate or help people to demonstrate their competence and their ability in the operation of openBIM. On the slide, this slide kind of captures that idea. The certification process is run through the workshop, through the chapters, I should say. So we've just recently set up a PCERT, Professional Certification Program in Australia. That is run through all those workshops. As the chapters, it has already generated 11,000 plus qualified individuals and some 140 plus training organizations worldwide. So the way that works is you undergo training through a certified training organization. You then sit a test exam, and if you pass that, then you become certified. Next one. Now, at this point, we'd like I want to get Ian to jump up or to go to the microphone, but we want to get some quick feedback from you on this certification process and training, in particular because the US chapter has begun to discuss this and I'm going to say more and over to Ian.
Thanks, Jim. We heard that skills training was really important just in terms of professional competency. At the moment, we offer one level of training, which is called foundation. So that's knowledge-based learning. What are all the terms? What are all the concepts? That's provided as a course in some 22 different countries. And there's a central examination for that certification. We are expanding that to include management. So for managers of projects that are BIM and openBIM oriented, how do you best coordinate and collaborate that all the way through to practitioner training, which is you can prove your competency on a live project. So these are things that we are developing. There's also some reference to ISO 19650 training, just to understand that framework at a high level. Level of development is a big topic to the extent that there should be any trainings and certification around that. And model as a legal document is a desired aspiration, talked about a lot, has a lot of concepts involved, like Simon said, deliverables. So we need to put some training around that. So how important is this training? Doesn't need to go to a certification level, which means there would be an examination, which is proctored, and a certificate. And you'd see that on the resumes of your workforce or your consulting team, where you'd be asking for those certifications. So we're trying to get a little bit of feedback from you of sort of where on that scale are these the important topics? Is there something else we're missing that should be being focused on? Because this takes development, it takes experts, it takes a lot of work to put the courseware in place and to put the examination process. So we're happy to invest, but your guidance in terms of some kind of ranking and stacking, and most importantly, have we missed something that's not on the list?
Thanks, Ian. So we're going to
Jim, I think we had a question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just
Can you
a
turn that over so that with the
Jim, just a question. You showed a variety of countries, the standards that they all create. Is there any belief that we can all use the same standard at some point in time, or do we have to have individual chapters always having their own standards? And specifically, is the bridge standard an IDM that was just created in the US? Is that anticipated to be used by the other countries?
Absolutely. Yes. So the Building Smart International model, excuse me, is to establish one central international standard. So the bridge work was a good example. It's actually an IDM, so it's a way of defining what information you need in bridge construction for based on IFC. So it's based on the IFC, but it will become an international IDM or standard. Yes, that's the intention. So all of Building Smart doesn't, there's no such thing as chapter standards. unless there are things of national standards, of course, but they're not under the umbrella of buildings, no. You know what I'm saying? Very good on you.
I was gonna. So then, as we're answering, it seems to me that building smart would provide what I would call a high level understanding of these concepts, and then each state or US would dive in with more detail on how it works, you know, for them, right? That's kind of what you're asking is, would you like some kind of final day, big picture understanding? And the other thing I would mention is we happen to be highway folks or transportation, so we would love all that to be in the context of highways. I mean, that's my perspective as a bit of input.
Yeah, no, I want to respond to that, but I'm not quite sure how to respond. Certainly, there's whatever standards we deliver at the buildings fund national level are the base, if you like, and how you apply those in the context of your national circumstances is of course up to you, but you can't sort of build or add to the standard, and it doesn't become part of the standard. It's simply your way of applying in your context. And you mean the IFC 4.3 can be applied to highways, also be applied to local roads, to handle any kind of road. All
Just to either extend or clarify, my understanding is that if we went IFC 4.3 or whatever 4.4, whatever version we're doing, then we would adhere to everything in there. But if we wanted to extend, add additional detail, we could do that. We would have the flexibility to do that as long as we document it properly. That could eventually grow into a 4.5 if adopted. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's not the schema. The IFC 4.3 schema is developed in the national environment, and it has all of that input. So it certainly can provide input into further developments of IFC. But often the national tweaking, as you say, is done through either the BSPD, which is the Building Smart Data Dictionary, which is based on terminology that allows you to find your own terminology, to map your terminology back to the IFC or back to other standards, and also through IBMs, which can be represented electronically as MVDs or IDS schemas, which allow you to define specific exchange requirements, which are in fact effectively subsets of the IFC schema. So extending the IFC schema means actually getting involved internationally to contribute to that work, but applying the schema and adapting it to your local purposes is fine. I don't really, we have to, I didn't invite questions, but we have too many questions now, we're out of time, but let's do it in quickly, but that's not up to me.
Okay, just a quick one then. Jim, Bill Pratt, Connecticut DOT.
Yeah.
And putting this in the context of the DOT world, right? What is the vision or, what is the vision of whose role this would be in the DOT to manage? So this is, it really seems to be a data, data focus here. And when we talk about foundation and practitioner, we're made up of engineers mostly, right? So is this role within the engineering realm, or is this role a data scientist? Who do you see, working with this data to ensure that our conversions from engineer 1 to engineer 2, as you showed in that slide, whose responsibility is for that? Sorry.
No, great question, Bill. And yeah, that's being sorted out now, right? How Ash is going to work with Building Smart. But kind of the way it's been working today is that the technical committees, you know, like the bed for bridges and structures, right? If that technical committee has identified what are their data requirements, right? Specifically, what attributes do I need, what, you know, all the data information. So that's being worked through that group to identify that data. And what I see is once that data is identified, the schema, the requirements, you know, you have to work that through the building smart process. But I really see JSTAN kind of working with all the disciplines to provide that umbrella for consistency and that it's coordinated. So I kind of see it both. I see, you know, I think that the technical committees like JTCES, or maybe even to the Denver Infrastructure Pool Fund, I can see them identifying specific data needs, right? But I do see JSTAN having a role to kind of coordinate, because you're going to have bridge, you're going to have roadway, you may have survey, you may have construction, you know, so I think there's going to be a lot of that. And then JSTAN handles long-term data governance, you know, working with Global Spark and those components. So I kind of, that's what I envision. I don't know, Mike Rossman, if you, any other things to add there, but that's still being worked out, you know, but that's kind of how it's been working to date. It seems to be working. Thank you.
No, I agree. I was just gonna say, I think that's part of the reason CDMA is sharing part of this, because of that overarching data role and data governance. And there's some fundamental reasons for that thing to exist. But there's still some things to be worked out, you know, but it's a great question. I think
I just wanted to make. I just want. Just for people that there could be a little confusion, I think this training is beyond IFC. This is broader on the processes of using BIM based on a whole range of open standards, not just IFC. So just so everybody is clear on it, at least that's what I see. I think that's the intent of this certification that's identified.
Okay, so we can't be focused not on the schema development per se. This issue now is around certifying people as engines. Okay, thank you. So Alexa, we need you to explain engine detail.
Okay, well, they've been using it a week, so I saw some people already. Oh, sorry. So the group has been using Mentimeter for the last couple of days, so you guys should be familiar. And I saw some people already scan the code and started making their choices. So if you can go ahead and do that for the folks online. You know, there is the Menti and then the code. Of course, you also can scan the QR code if you're online. And so we want to give them a couple of minutes or a minute. It's just a lighter bar, I think.
All we're asking you to do at this moment is just to give your own judgment on the importance of each of these training needs, and in the moment of an opportunity for to add other areas if you wish to. So we're trying to get a sense from you about how important you see each of these.
Is it important that it's within the next 5 years? Like, how important are these in the next 5 years? Or is that not?
And this is really just at this moment in time coming up, where should the US chapter in particular place its priorities?
Do you want me to show the results? Or
Yes, if there are some results already. In a sense, it is also a trial of the process so that we understand it.
Pauline is gonna bring up the slide. Oh, maybe I do. Bring me.
Okay, so that's, you could just show that. Okay.
I think that's. Yeah, that's good. Karina. So we have 49 people that voted and you can see the distribution. So thank you. And the pool is going to be open for another 40 days. So, you know, you can choose, I guess, change your mind or whatever. But that's kind of like the distribution. Obviously, all of them are important, right? So at some point, we're gonna have to figure out which one is most important. But yeah, all right, great, thank you.
And there's a follow-on requesting further topics.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I don't think we have one for that, but if you could. So what Jim was asking is if there are other topics that you think are important, we'll take some of those as well. So you can put it in the chat if you are online, if there are other topics, or if there's any other topics here in the room, you know, we can go ahead and document that now. And now remember that this is really for more the user to understand these concepts as they relate to openBIM. So.
Okay, so do you wish to add further ones? Let's not do it verbally now, but if you can give those as feedback to us today, that'd be good.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Back to my presentation.
Of course.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, this is just to say that there are resources available through Building Smart. So there's a standards library there which you should feel free to explore. So everything is there. Just go to that and browse anything that might be of interest to you. There's some examples on the screen. So that gets us to the theme for today, which is planning the future. Where are we going? And I want to explain first of all that's in the context of building smarts, sort of broader strategic direction. And so at the moment, Building Smart International are going through or have started a process of looking forward and strategic planning to understand where we should go in the future. Let's take the next slide. So this is a draft, a comment slide that was put out by our new CEO. And you can see that it's also on a similar time frame. It's talking about the sorts of activities that will happen, we anticipate will happen over this time. It begins with where we are at the moment with IFC 4.3. IFC 4.4 is a tentative name assigned to the tunnel extensions, which should come out later this year. There actually is the deployment phase of their work at the moment, so they're testing the extensions for the tunnel, which will become part of IFC. And then we're talking about over the next couple of years, concentrating on deliver and drive adoption, and then getting into the next generation standards to go forward. So what we're doing in infrastructure room is really has to exist in the context of this work. Next one. This is also just a good summary of the Building Smart standards and services. I mentioned briefly before both the data dictionary and IDM. There's also a use case management tool, which is allows us to document use cases and to put those out there and to share those. And they basically follow the same structure as an IBM following ISO. Whatever it is, I'm not got the number, won't come to my brain. But doesn't matter. And it should come to my brain because I'm actually chair of that working group. That's the point. I'm getting old. But importantly, the IBM allows you to define exchange requirements that are relevant to whatever process you're involved in, whatever stage in that process you're involved in. And it provides through the ISO standard, you define the mechanism process, a process you might follow, a workflow you might follow to develop an understanding of what those exchange requirements are. You can then actually express those either as an MVD or increasingly as an IDS, which are two standards that Building Smart support, to share those in a digital way through software. The use case management tool I mentioned. So between those services that we're Building Smart International provide a range of mechanisms for you to adapt and to extend the standard, but not actually change the standard itself. The next slide. And importantly, one of the things that's coming up, of course, is integration of IFC's work into this whole notion of a digital twin, urban digital twin. And so I want to just make the point that Building Smart is focused, and part of this work is focused on that activity and trying and understanding where we fit into that ecosystem. So this talks about the value of openBIM in that context of device flexibility, sustainability, efficiency, access, and opportunity. And we see those values that Building Smart deliver through its standards as being relevant to the future development of urban digital twins. Next. The other one I wanted to mention just quickly before I move on to our work is the relationship between OGC and BSI. As we work through the process of developing infrastructure extensions for IFC, of course, that brought us into contact with and a close relationship with OGC, because their standards, particularly Infra GML and GeoSciML, which are two of their key standards that affect us. The latter one, you've got the GeoSciML or that geotechnics, and so that's more relevant to the tunneling and underground works. But and into GML, of course, is relevant to this larger scale of operation. And IFC 4.3, of course, does respect that and handles map coordinates and the evidence things. But it's important to understand that. Next. So here we now get on to our own roadmap. This is what the roadmap diagram looked like in the period up to 2019, and it was presented in this way. It showed streams of work and activities leading to an end point at the end of 2022. So that was really our starting point to develop a roadmap going forward. Next. Notice we had, for that we have a number of work streams that were both identified at that stage and which we've adopted as the basis for our current roadmap. And it's fine. We've now come up with this diagram to show, to represent, the base diagram to represent where we're going in the future. And so you can see over here those streams: industry training, use cases, inter-extension projects, testing and piloting, ontologies and BSDD, technical support, white papers, liaisons with groups like the other rooms, ODC, and ISO and so on, and community outreach. What we want you to do now is go back into the Mentimeter and to give us some sense about what you see as being the relative importance of those. Showing you that.
Yeah.
And once you're in, if you just keep, when you submit, it takes you to the next question and so on and so forth, so.
Okay, can we jump through to that? So what I meant to say here is that what this is showing is our first perception of how important, the relative importance of these streams, activities in these streams, as we move forward. Now, obviously, it's fortune telling, we can't really know what the future holds, but this is, you can see that basically we see the moment 23 and 24 to a lesser extent are really consolidation years. That's when we need to lock in industries engagement with the standard that we have at the moment, 4.3. And then as we move forward, there ought to be further extension projects that we put in place. We don't quite know what they are yet. We have some ideas, but we need to think about that going forward. And we need to maintain most of the other activities fairly evenly across that time frame. And communication down the bottom is fairly critical at the moment, and it's going to become more critical toward the end as we reach the end goal of some of these projects which are yet to come. So it's trying to capture that sense of the streams of activities and how we are going to move forward. And as we go forward in this presentation, I need to speed up a little bit. We're going to be talking about what sort of activities might fit into those streams. So very quickly, we want you to evaluate those streams for us. So where you think the importance lies, particularly at the moment. You know, have we got this kind of weighting correct? We emphasize white papers have got thicker ground, maybe that's less important. We want your thoughts on that. Roger. You seem to be condemned to having
Roger Graham. Jim, yeah.
It's not. Is it on? Yeah, there you go.
The question is about the extension projects. It's a little hard to know relatively how to evaluate those. Can you give a high level sense of the maturity of IFC for infra that would help you let people know how important that is relative to implementation activities?
I can attempt to.
Sure you can.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, we've now completed the IFC 4.3, which I said before includes road and rail and bridge and ports and waterways. It will shortly also include tunnel, which is coming up this year. And basically that provides most of, at my rough guess, that would provide maybe 90% of the requirements for linear infrastructure. But there are areas which aren't covered, particularly when you start thinking about urban scale modeling, or you start thinking about other aspects of the evaluation and understanding of the built environment and the natural environment for that matter going forward. So there's probably a need to do more work on landscape design, for example, and landscape planning in some of those areas. So we don't want to lock in at this stage what those are. What we're inclined by this diagram is that there's not much happening in that space at the moment, but we need to think about what that might look like going forward. And so what we're really asking you to do, what we're really asking you to do is just to evaluate whether you think at the moment we should be focused on that more, or whether we should be focused on other
Yeah, just to clarify, and that's a great question, Roger, thanks for bringing it up. So right now, just to put it in the context of DOT, right? The schema, the 4.3 schema has certain objects that it supports in the schema, okay? And property sets. So let's say that we discover that there is an object in the property set that is not in it. A project would allow for that work to be added to the schema. So it is important in the sense that if it doesn't do what you need it to do today, it doesn't mean you have to fix it, you just have to figure out what project to fund at some point. I think that was your point, right?
Yeah, and I think, Jim's answer helped to clarify that. It sounds like for the bulk of projects that we'd be involved with, everything's there that we need to proceed. So we don't have to think so much about development, we can think about other things that might point to more development, but not required to start to do other things. I think that's a good distinction to have for people.
I have a clarifying question too, Roger.
But now I have it turned on.
So I guess I didn't see the liaison line there, and if I'm understanding it, IFC only forms a part of what DOTs will need to fully solve, but to fully share the typical information they want to. So I guess I just want to confirm that if I was to vote, I would say it's about 4.3 and engaging those other standards in a meaningful way to solve their more comprehensive view. And then the extensions sound good too, but that's how I think about it.
I think that's a perfectly valid way of looking at it.
Yeah.
The liaisons are very important. I mean, and that we need to be constantly engaged with that at a local level, the national level, local, West level. Then thinking about what other standards are in play in this country that you need to interact with is also very important. But you know, you don't want to. So the building smart doesn't offer IC as the solution for everything, but we have a set of basic standards and services that can be built on and can be operating in parallel with the national standards.
Yeah, and I think when you use the term open BIM versus open standards, now you're saying everything that's needed for BIM. Well, so that's why I'm trying to just focus think about whether maybe Building Smart is the shepherd. I don't know, because you do have quite a network to help us connect those standards in the ways that we need to. So I don't know how that fits in the strategy of what you're trying to do today, but that's to me something that's important.
Thank you. Okay, can we move on? Okay, next slide then. Okay, this is just a disclaimer, just to make it really clear. Some people, when they listen to me talk about this, think it's a done deal, that the roadmap is complete. It's not complete. We're part of a process. That process is going on, and you're now becoming part of that process. So please understand that. Yeah, next one. So I'm going to speed up. Yes, I'm actually wrong. We've been going for an hour, so I'm actually running out of time, but I'll be very quick. So these are the 5 workshops that have already been held. You can see the dates there, through to September last year. Next slide. And for each of those workshops, we got the convener of those workshops to live this down in. They convened those workshops to produce 2 slides, one which is summarizing from their perspective what came out of that. I'm not going to go through these in detail, it's not really that important to us except to understand the process. And so this is the Italian workshop, and you can't get familiar anyway. Next one. And then we asked them to summarize the observations that came out of their workshop in their own terms, in their own headings, and then we asked them to refine those into a summary of conclusions under our streams. So coming out of the Italian workshop, they identified a couple of topics out of under consolidation, use cases, and so on through that list. So that was the process we went through. We asked the conveners to pull together the information that came out of their workshop and to share it with us in that summary form. So keep on going through. Same applies to Germany. Next one. That's the German workshop used this as an approach, the Rose, Thorn and Bud approach to identify ideas and to rank them. Next one. And they come up with some conclusions. So we're going to click through all the next few slides. Finland, same thing. Australasia, I should pause on this, but I won't. We did the same thing. We had a virtual workshop over 2 hours, and we came up with lots of ideas. Next one, and summarised those ideas here. If you're interested in those details, you can always get them by going to these things. Next one. This is the Swedish workshop. And again, their conclusions. Next one. This slide then is kind of the point where we brought all those ideas together. So what we did was got them all onto our roadmap baseline, and you can see there the set of ideas, not structured in the way that simply dropped onto those streams, and this sort of there is an next starting point. Next. We then had to collate all of that. So we produced a document which is a working document, which was just a summary of all of those. It's coded in color, so the raw data in that document is shown in green. The blue is our consolidated accumulation of that data. And then we asked at the Montreal workshop summit, we asked people to do what you're doing today, to vote on those and to add comments on them. And so this document, it's available to you. I'm not sure it's yet available, it certainly will be available to you to look at. It has all the dirty detail. And you're welcome to have a look at that if you wish to, but it's really part of the process as we go through, and we eventually just pulled out the information that's in blue, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Next one. So these are all of those key ideas, again, collected and arranged into their respective streams. And what we're going to do today, after morning tea, is go through each of these. I'll explain briefly what each one meant, because it's not self-evident from the one-line description. And then we're going to ask you to evaluate those weightings on them, how important you think it is. So we're asking you to do exactly the same thing as the community did during the Montreal workshop. Next one. So this is the voting that came out of the Montreal workshop. We used Miro to do that, and all we got people to do was to drop votes onto the circles associated with each idea. Here we're using Mentimeter, it's essentially the same process. Next. And what came out of that is 5 key things that were seen important to use in your foundation plan. Thank you. One was the first one we were looking at is the idea of user guides came up very strongly, and so we identified several types of people, several topics for potential user guide, and you'll come to see those after the morning tea break. We also had support for the operations asset handover framework project, which is operating at the moment, was about to start, I should say. BSDD infrastructure was a key idea, important, seems important. A activity to develop an overview of infrastructure project processes was another one, which I'll explain in more detail after the break. And IFC for infrastructure is the fifth one. There's also three activities that related to IFC technical development and support, which came up strongly in the voting. So they're also here. We're not going to be looking at those today. But we're going to focus on the other 5 areas. Next one. We then, as a group, we then started to flesh out what those activities might look like. And so there's a sequence of slides here, which I'm not going to go through in detail again, because we don't have the time and it's not urgent at the moment, but you can look at them later for your interest. But for each of those 5 topics, a member of our working group identified the purpose or documented the purpose, context, industry need, and focus areas of that activity. Next slide. And developed a very rough draft project plan to give us some idea of the time that we required and resources that would be needed for that activity. That gave us, helped us to begin to think about what these activities might look like in reality. Okay. Next one. And so you'll see there's one of those for each of those. There's 2 slides for each of those topics. We don't need to go through this in detail now, so you're right to want to begin. Scroll down and at the end. Oh, and sorry, this is, well, not so important, but this is also the voting for the other low priority items that came out of the Montreal workshop. So that's also documented here. Next one. And so this is the where we're up to at the moment. This is really our state of play. It's not a roadmap, but it shows us what each of those 5 activities, where they sit, and it also shows a few. It also shows a few of the activities that we as a steering committee have identified as being urgent or important. One is the continuing work and completion of the work on IFC tunnel, which is going to be 4 point something rather, 4. Future project planning, so it's the role of the steering committee to start to think about what the next set of projects should be, and obviously rely on our community to give us guidance on that to go forward. And a very important activity is tracking and encouraging the reporting of pilots. There's already several pilots that have been run in different parts of the world and using IFC 4.3, and I'm sure that you'll also be involved, perhaps already are involved in doing pilots. We want to keep track of that and to understand what is happening and to report that to the wider community. So that's really where I end. What we want to do now is pick up the results out of this workshop and other workshops which we hope will happen shortly. We want to accept those results so that we can report those back to the summit in a fortnight's time. It will be Mike's responsibility. As a workshop, we then, as a steering committee, we then need to start to put milestones onto those and start to develop it as a formal roadmap, and we need to start adopting it moving forward. That's me. I'm contactable anytime. Well, not any time, but most of the time. My email address is there. So any questions or comments quickly, and then I think it's time for our break. Over time for our break. Any further comments or questions? I think we're done. So after the break, we'll be going through each of those key ideas that came out, probably explaining them and answering questions about them, and asking you to go through the process of ranking, well, not ranking them, but giving us feedback on the importance of those. So all as clear as mud. No one's goes off, so I guess I'm shocked. Thank you. That's over.
One quick thing, somebody who made a comment about the digital aspects in the chat. Somebody online, anyway, I'll find out, but somebody's logged in as me, and that wasn't, oh, it was David?
No, it says everyone under.
Well, it came from me, it popped up on my screen.
It was- it was
I guess
the
I just
panelists.
connected the link that was put into my calendar.
Ian, how?
Ian responded to my comment that I didn't make, so,
Yeah,
that was your comment.
it was about digital output.
Okay,
Yeah.
you can change your name in Zoom,
Okay.
Yeah.
and that should fix it.
Yeah,
Okay,
I just used the link that was sent in my.
They were personal links, David, you're using Mike's link.
I didn't use the link.
Yes.
So you're not like Mike.
change your name in Zoom. Thanks, 15-minute break. It's 9:41, so I'm 9:56.
No, I just went into my calendar.
Yes.
And I clicked on the link.
Apparently there's a little bit of confusion about what we meant by streams, so that's kind of what under the bridge in one sense, and unintended. The streams are essentially a way of grouping our activities and making sure we cover sort of the main activities that are important to us. So things like consolidation training was the first one on the top of the diagram. Things like liaison is just another stream. White papers is a stream of activity, producing white papers, and obviously extension projects is a stream. So they're just ways of us grouping things together. What we're now going to do is look at each of the consolidated ideas that came out of the workshops to date under each of those streams. And so this is the first example of that. Under the first stream, consolidation training, when we looked at all of the input we got from the workshops, it was pretty obvious that the main activity that needs to be done is this idea of user guides, input-in user guides. And the user guide is like a practice note, if that's a term in a institution context in Australia. The Institute of Architects publishes practice notes, which is short, 1 or 2 pages on a particular topic to help educate and explain up-to-date information to its members. So this is much the same kind of idea. It's a succinct guideline document, short briefing papers, if you like, that address identified issues and serve as a resource for infrastructure stakeholders and practitioners in that context. And out of the workshops came quite a long list, if there are 10 items there, of topics. Some of them are very specific, some of them are quite broad, and so they vary in style. What we want you to do is think about how important you think each of these is, and whether there are topics that you think a user guide would be useful that you might add to the list. So that's the second step. The first step is to rank or to evaluate these. And the way you'll evaluate them through Mentimeter is by using a sliding scale. And the sliding scale actually has 4 positions on it. There's sort of, if you do nothing, then it's not important at all, through to very important to drag the slider all the way across. So it's really simply a matter of positioning the slider somewhere across. You're trying to lock onto, I think, 3 intermediate points.
Yeah, so. Let me explain, because I think there was some confusion earlier, so the scales is 0, not important, 3, very important. But it's almost like a yes or no, right, or indifferent, but you can also, I think you can also skip. If you don't understand what you're voting on. And so that doesn't go into the score. If you put a 0, it actually goes into the score of priorities, but if you skip it, it doesn't go into the calculation, simply, I don't understand, so I can't vote.
So your vote doesn't count.
Yeah.
So if you don't wish to express an view on it, then for whatever reason, probably misunderstanding or not understanding might be a reason, then you skip it. So I'll explain them very briefly. The first is an overview of IC 4.3 concepts for end users, just trying to provide a fairly succinct user guide that will help people to understand what ISC brings to the table for infrastructure users. The second one is ISC's place in the information standards ecosystem. So again, it's about where does ISC fit in relation to all the other standards, those ISO standards, national standards, other industry standards such as ODC or any of the other associations that operate within our domains. Contractual guidelines is about clarifying how IFC might be introduced into a contractual agreement and how that might work. Another one was managing file size for infrastructure. There is a concern that the IFC files get very large. That's something we should be addressing as a user guide to help people understand how to handle that. And what strategies might be used going forward to handle that. Another one was just how much one might represent particular objects, particularly things like holes in infrastructure, whether it's representing those simply as a very simple piece of geometry, or whether you should represent the total geometry, and then you might do that. It's a 3D model. Kinematic properties is around is concerned with design speed. For the road context, it's the design speed for a road and the road. Then there was some confusion or wish for better understanding of the role of the Building Smart Data Dictionary in relation to IFC and how that should be used or deployed within the context of infrastructure. Similarly, IDS and the UCM system, the use space management system, and the information delivery specification. Those are services or concepts, tools that are being provided by Building Smart International, and having a guide that explains those in more detail, value of that. Another one was more modeling infrastructure networks as topological systems. In other words, should we so how important is it to get a guide on how we might use IFC to model a rail net, sorry, a road network or rail network at an urban scale or even a national scale. And the last one, and these are in no particular order, by the way, but just simply as they came out. The last one was machine control for earthworks. So there were some of the user guides that were identified in the previous workshops. What we're asking you to do is to just give you a quick assessment of the importance of each one, and then there'll be an opportunity to add to that list. Because the program Mentimeter only handles a maximum of 9 items, 8 items, I think it might be. We've actually broken this into 2. So the first one will be asking you to rate the first 5, then you submit that. Then you'll be able to rate the second 5, and then you'll have an opportunity to add any further thoughts that you have. Any questions or clarification around that? I know, fantastic, but it's so, really off pattern. Thank you. Okay, go to it. I'm assuming someone's monitoring the online, but is there any questions or combination of this? I'm not doing it myself. So we're just the money. So we've done the voting. Well, we're going to work through each of these separately. And there's plenty of time. We'll leave it for voting, so we do that after that. If you like better, you can also manually type in going and then put on. Anyone not coding with Mentimeter? We're not going to report the results as we go. We're going to do that at the end as we sort of put it all together. So we're just doing the voting for this day. Get back to the final. Right. Give me some idea, if you kind of start staring at you've done the voting. You're ready to proceed to the next topic, which is the next screen. So you're doing 3 steps here. You're voting for the first part, you're voting on the second part, and then adding the further news you have. And you've completed that, we'll go on to the next thing. Happy to answer any questions. You will find you have the ability to sort of move all the way through these screens, but it's better to keep together. So when you finish these items, we want to move on. So are we ready to move on yet? I think who's not ready to move on? Want a bit more time? Few people.
as you advance, there's also an open-ended question on what other use guides that we didn't capture here, so you can just type in your answer.
And that'll be the pattern for each of these. So you vote on the existing ones and then have an opportunity to add other things which you think might be important. We're not going to vote on those other things per se, but we want to collect them. Anyone still need more time? Okay, let's move on to the next one. So the next one is use cases, and there are two slides here. So there are three use cases that came up, so I'll explain briefly. The first is there was a need expressed for an overview of project processes. So the thought is to create a high-level definition using an IDM style approach to information delivery approach to identify the process associated with the delivery, management, operations of a infrastructure entity through its life cycle, and to identify the key data exchange requirements. This is envisaged as being a high level context IBM, for want of a better word, information delivery manual, definition specification, and to or use case specification might be a better way of thinking about it. That would then be able to be built by communities looking at more focused use cases. So that was the first one. The second one was defining the data requirements for infra operations. So the use case development activity relates closely to the asset operations handover project. And so it's really, we're really voting on that. So what's the process involved, the importance of the process of moving from the construction phase through to asset operations handover, and what data is required for that. And the next slide, the third use case, which was ISC support in GIS integration. So this has raised a number of workshops. It's already been partly addressed because there's a strategy group at the BSI buildings on international level. And there's also been some previous work done by integrated digital built environment working group. And so this will just pull that together and extend on it. So there's a strong need expressed for that use case to be explored in greater detail. So those are the three things we're asking you to rate in terms of their importance on that 3-point scale. And then if there are other use cases you think might be important, then add those two. Yeah.
So please pick the one. You just mark one as 3 and leave the other 2.
It shouldn't say that. It shouldn't be allowing you to.
Oh, yeah, no, ignore that. Ignore the pick one.
Again, so let's go on to the next one. Just that work? Yeah. So you should have a screen which allowing you to rate the importance of those 3 use cases. And then the following one, after you submit that, will be an opportunity for you to spell out other use cases that you think might be. And don't need to do those in great detail at this moment, giving us a succinct sentence. And then later on, there'll be an opportunity to flesh that out. probably should say, just for information purposes, on this integration with GIS, IFC 4.3 does allow you to define map coordinates and to position things relative to the map coordinates. And there was in fact a piece of work done and a report produced by a small working group to really explore the implications of that. So there's quite a bit of work already done on that issue of integration, but it's still more understanding needed. And of course, it's not just map coordinates, it's the issue of integration of OGC, because they have a variety of standards, CGML and GML and so on. Yeah.
You allow for. You allow. Sorry, again, do you allow for multi-object representation, i.e. point versus polygon, depending on scale? A light pole, for example, at certain scales are much more effective for doing things as a point. Certain other characteristics you need a polygon or object.
Yeah, ISC supports those sort of representation.
Multi-representation within the same object.
Yeah, yeah. An object can have multiple geometric representations. Sorry? That's my understanding. Even in ISC 2.3 to X3, that's the case. Okay, anyone need more time on that one? Seeing no panics, so let's move on. So these are the comment at the beginning here, a strong view is expressed across most of the workshops. Prioritize consolidation and training has been a critical thing at the moment. We've just got IFC 4.3 on the table, and we have a whole need to consolidate that before we launch into further development in the infrastructure space. And we've got a tunnel coming up very shortly. So we didn't actually get any suggested project ideas. That's not to say we're not interested in getting suggested new project ideas either now or going forward in the future. But these three projects are already at some level of development. So the most active one is the asset operations handover framework activity. It's currently moving forward. We're still looking for more funding support. There's been some funding provided for it, particularly from the infrastructure side. And so it's going to move forward, and we're pretty confident it will become an active project fairly soon. These other two are ones that exist in the sense that there has been an activity proposal prepared for them, so they're in that initiation phase, but there's been no commitment by anyone to actually fund or drive those projects forward. So the way projects operate within Building Smart is you can put an idea on the table as an activity proposal, but until you actually get support for it in terms of members or chapters or organizations willing to put money into the organizations to fund it, then it doesn't really get off the ground. So these two projects are sitting there in that state, which some of us would like to see those move forward, but we can't until they get some funding. So that's why I've included them here. I'm interested in your assessment of their importance at this stage, and bearing in mind what I just said, they can't move forward until we not only get industry support for them, saying they're important, but also someone who's with money on the table. They can't operate without money. That makes sense. So if you're voting and you represent an organisation that funds one of these projects, you're really saying, oh, this something that's important. I'll see if I can get some money and put on the table. But these are those three activities. We're interested in your thoughts on those and any other ideas that you might have.
Jim, there was a question on what does environmental management refers to? What does that mean?
All right, I come in as I said before, part of the ISC 413 supports and waterways extension. That was one of the domains that was explored with strong funding. So in ISC 413, there are lots of concepts in there to do with port facilities and management of those. A follow-on project was proposed, or has been proposed, to start to look at the environmental management associated with coastal habitat and coastal regions. And that seems to be a natural follow-on from the Ports and Waterways project. At the moment, it's still in that gestation phase, that initiation phase, but that's what it's really focusing on. So, coastal erosion and things of that nature. There's a developed activity proposal which you can see if you wish to. So we're ready to proceed. Anyone need more time on that one? Okay.
I think we're good.
Yep. The next one is to do with IFC tech development support. So these are the three ideas that emerged out of the workshop that we thought when we were classifying things really were not just to solve really for the infrastructure, really, but needed collaboration. So the first is sorry. It is managing software inconsistency. So it's the inconsistency in the way in which the IFC is exported or delivered or managed within the software that are already out there, and trying to deal with those inconsistencies. Some of that is at the user level, because people don't necessarily understand how to create a model correctly, and so it can be exported successfully. But so also it's to do with often the software tool itself. So it's really looking at how we can deal with those sort of inconsistencies that have surfaced traditionally, particularly with IFC, earlier versions of IFC. The next one was to do with validation process, and that's to do with actually evaluate or validating the quality of IFC export from a tool to check that it's actually delivering all the information that you require and is being structured correctly. So it's checking the notion of checking an IFC export to a data set to make sure it's valid. And the third one was to do with call it design to design. It's really the challenge that is often faced in practice, where you build a model, a model editing tool of some kind, and then you export that to another design tool for further analysis and further development. And often that exchange is incomplete, and you need to do a lot of rework in order to make and move that process, to make that process smooth. And so there is a need to give greater support for that kind of design to design explain this issue. And again, it's something which needs to be addressed not only with infrastructure, but it affects other domains as well. Roger, you're looking very desperate to speak.
Yeah, that's the point I was trying to think about, is if voting for this for infrastructure, you know, what does that represent? Because it is across the IFC issue, so.
It allows us to say we've got strong push on the infrastructure community to deal with this issue and to then put pressure on the smart to look at it in collaboration with us as we can deal with infrastructure cases and point out the deficiencies that it's something that is across the room, in other words, across this. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, and also that it's an issue that should be worked on at all times anyway, whether it's a real problem for certain implementations or not. We don't want to scare people that it can't be used, but this is to keep this moving so that we always have good implementations, I think, right?
Yeah. So they understood that correctly. Anyone have any other questions about those? Yep. Thanks, Pauline.
This is Michael Minnesota.
Sorry.
The design to design concept, is that including future designs, so even reuse 10 years later, or is it just within the set of one project?
Jim, I think the question is it design view versus reference view? That question is related to that, not necessarily the use case.
Yeah, it came up particularly strongly in the German workshop as a concern that in practice, often when you move from a say an editing tool, you know, Revit or any of the editing tools, a model creation with a view to doing some kind of other design analysis on it, the transfer of data just doesn't support that process, and it's a need that is out there. It's not like I won't say it's a common complaint, but it's an issue that people find they struggle with quite a bit in industry, and it's something that needs to be addressed. It's not an easy issue to deal with, because you're dealing with software implementation, you're dealing with end users not modeling things correctly. So there's a complex issue, but we can be conscious of how we can smooth that process. What this is all about. It's actually can't be making a judgment now. It's actually an important complex issue. It's also a very complex one, so it's not easy to solve. It's an ongoing process, as Roger said. But you know, it came up, people raised it as concern. So yeah, I'm reading that. And it was, well, you're voting on it. Okay, are we ready? How are we going? Next one. We now come to the white papers. There are several white papers proposed, I think 9 or 10, and so again they've been grouped as we go through. But the first two on this list are the role of the Building Science Data Dictionary, using a white paper that explores that and, you know, with reasonable depth to help people to understand and how to understand how to deploy the Building Science Data Dictionary in the context of their project. Next one was the application of IDS and UCM services on Building Smart. clarifying how they can be used within the community. And again, these are basic issues that don't just affect infrastructure. In fact, that they're important that we put on the table. So are these on one version slip or is it?
There are two slides
Two slides.
that refer to those white papers, so. Once you submit your first selection, when you go to the next one, you'll see other white papers.
Okay, so should I keep on going through these slides?
Yeah.
Okay, the next one. Handling parametric processes in IFC, software tools often use proprietary parametric processing for complex geometry, especially geometry. This causes challenges in changing data. So this white paper will explore that issue and presumably come up with some kind of strategies for handling parametric processes. Contractual guidelines that we referred to briefly before, so providing guidance inside how contractual issues can be managed from an information management perspective, share experiences with different contract configurations and foster innovation and improve collaboration. So this is dealing with the contractual context of IOC. Next one, communication channels. So how do we deal with getting the message out there and helping people to improve processes generally through communication channels? That was a topic that was raised. Systems models infrastructure, I referred to this a little bit before, so to what extent can we model facility-wide topological models or handle operational dependencies between say a boom gate and signal failure. And so that's just an example. So operational relationships can they be modeled? Should they be modeled? How do we do that in IFC? Dealing with that sort of issue in the infrastructure context. That makes sense? Yes. Managing land survey data. I think it was pointed out that survey data often uses null Z values. How do you handle that in IFC, which is potentially a 3D system, and what are the challenges associated with that? That's a very specific issue. One of the things that was highlighted, an example of that is the pipes are 3D modeled through their axis, central axis, but in fact, what you're really concerned about is when you're going to keep it, it's the vacuum, so the top of the so how do you resolve that? It's an issue. Defining spatial structures, infrastructure work. Spatial structure is the way in which IFC allows you to organize a project model around the data set, around spatial concerns. So it's easy way of understanding that is to appreciate that in buildings, it's very relatively simple and it's well understood. You think about buildings on a site, buildings having stories, the stories having spaces, and then an individual entities within the model become associated with those spaces. So an entity belongs to a space, therefore it belongs to a story, therefore it belongs to a building kind of concept. How do we translate that concept into a spatial structure in the infrastructure domain? And IFC 4.3 tackles that. It's changed, that's created a more generic way of defining the spatial structure. But the issue is how do we apply that? How do we utilize that effectively within the infrastructure space? And that's kind of a big question because infrastructure utility have not tended to think about their models in quite that way. So how do we handle that?
Jim, if you don't mind, I'd like to add, so in the context of what it applies to us as an industry, this is how you connect your, the spaces, the spatial structure would relate to intersections, segments, the type of things that we actually manage and operations and the linear referencing system and those kinds of things, you know, those would be our spaces. Right, is an intersection is a space versus an object. Pavement is an object, but is it part of the intersection? Is it part of the ramp? Is it part of the linear segment of the roadway? So I think just to explain the difference between infrastructure and buildings, that would be our spatial reference. If you're voting.
Seems like, Alexa, that would also be critical for connecting to GIS, right? Or two, because they see things as one, you know, area or whatever. Yeah.
Yes, so the comment in the room for those online was that this would also be important for the connection to GIS because that's how assets are managed in those systems.
Can I see the one again on system models and construction? It's like one or two up.
This one?
It was in this, right?
Okay, back down.
So, there we go. What I was trying to think about is if any of this relates to digital twin, you know, connection. And so I wasn't clear on what that meant, but does it?
Well, it can,
Okay.
but it's not what this is specifically looking at. It's just saying to what extent can be used or how should we use the concept of a system in IFC, a system would be, you know, a circulation system or any kind of system.
Okay.
And in infrastructure, you actually can, in IFC 4.39C, you can actually capture that relationship if you need to. And you can also represent a facility line or a road network for a state or a city or a region. Perfectly possible, but we need to think about how that might be done. So the suggestion of a white paper that where a group of experts sit down and actually scratch that out and explore some suggestions or proposals.
Thank you.
Just a clarification, so IFC 4.3 handles LRS referencing natively, or it's to be built out.
Sorry.
So linear referencing.
Oh, linear, yes.
Within a transportation network, normally DOTs will describe by county route mile point or station offset. And so IFC 4.3 supports that as well as real world coordinates.
Yeah. So you really, the placement of any entity, it can either be and all three at the same time. You can have an actual location in the space, your map coordinates. You can have a relationship to a spatial concept, such as a road segment or an intersection, or it can be a linear reference and offset from a model.
It's not exactly about that. Sorry, next one. It's a spatial reference. You can reference it, but it's based on coordinate geometry. So you can derive the LRS parameters, but not natively as you're thinking of it in towards the lines.
So you map from map coordinates to a local coordinate system. So typically, if you had my understanding of how it might work, if you have a model of an intersection at that scale, that might be done in coordinates, in normal XYZ coordinates. But each of those points can relate to a map coordinate, so you can spatially locate. You can also model it in map coordinates. An intersection could be modeled, or the geometry could be in map long and elevation.
So a lot of DOTs in the US, their GIS department uses roads and highways, extension of every, and, you know, that's where the linear referencing system comes into play and the measures, offsets, mileposts, reference off the offsets. And so to get this into roads and highways, it would take some sort of inflation to their own state's network. That sort of process, correct?
Yeah. And in my view, whether you use a Esri, a GIS kind of system, or whether you decide that an ISC is a better way of representing it, including Ireland, there's no reason why not.
I think from a workflow standpoint, John, the completion process is the same. Almost identical, like we work on the same place. So, do it in the back, not natively, because I don't think you want to do that natively in this team. It's exactly the same as you do that for those areas. And that's the beauty of 4.3. But it does bring infrastructure near infrastructure into the thing.
I also just wanted to add that Esri last year did join Building Smart International. That Benjamin has made it part of the Esri strategic roadmap to support IFC in the Pro and GIS toolset. So that's
Yeah, that's one area.
So for those of you online, I'm just describing that for the third time, Esri have joined Building Smart International. That's made IFC support part of the strategy in terms of support by the standards for the Esri toolset. Works being done by Esri to ensure that this idea of BIM and GIS integration can work, which is great. Really important to the horizontal infrastructure projects. You're all using Esri, so they are a Building Smart partner, which is terrific. So in the same way as we had a discussion yesterday, of how do you all as a combined consolidated voice put pressure on Revit relative to civil 3D modeling or Bentley in terms of open roads. The same is now true of Esri. If you want stuff, that idea of a consolidated voice is feedback to Esri in terms of what's most important. Game on, go for it.
Okay, so yeah, so the last of the white papers. Do we need more time on white papers? Any further questions? We're getting to the end. Okay, and of course, if you have any other suggested topics, then please share those. Oh, have we covered these ones?
No, we have not.
My apologies. Okay, so what with this point relates to the need to handle. The argument was that in an infrastructure context.
Yeah.
Paul's pushing me again. In the context of an infrastructure project, there tend to be many more changes to the design as you construct, and alignment changes all the time as you deal with challenges, particularly subterranean challenges. And so it's important to be able to represent or to manage those design changes. It happens in a building as well, but it's a different kind of proposition. So this white paper will explore that concept. The next one is object type libraries for infrastructure. It's to what extent and how do we develop object type libraries that are relevant to infrastructure. You know what I mean by an object type library? A product, especially a product library. You want
Jim, didn't you also have one on the data dictionary earlier? Did you also have?
yeah.
Is
So,
this the same thing?
potentially, yes. Yeah, I mean, sure. Well, with Hubert getting ideas that came out of the workshops, and so this you could argue that this is exactly a BSDD issue, but it's I guess it's actually concerning with to what extent should we be trying to build product libraries for infrastructure that at a national level. that make sense?
I think it's still hard to distinguish between the two, so. I
Well,
guess
if you're
we're
doing.
having the same challenge, so, okay.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to explain that ESDD is broader than just a product library, and that it does allow us to load classification systems, both national and international. It is about products, but it's also about extensions to the IFC schema in terms of a local or a national vision. So ESDD is a broader animal in terms of how it can be applied as a part of the tool set. Certainly the product library can probably the same. So I think this one is the product part, whereas ESDD is that broader understanding of how it can be used in multiple ways to support schema extensions, classification systems, in addition to product libraries, property sets, and map to national standards as well.
Okay. And the next one is automation of the infrastructure sector, which is the issue of automating the process of construction, the process of design, and applying that in the infrastructure context to reduce development and so on. So that's what that one was about. I need to be clearer than that. That's that was the last of the white papers. Ready to move on? So this one is the final stream for community outreach. There are two ideas that came up here, which seem to be unique. One was just promoting more strongly the encouragement of pilot projects and putting them forward for part of the BSI awards program. In other words, to bring the steering committee to actively promote the use of pilots and encourage more submissions to the awards program in order to show how IFC can be applied in the infrastructure space. The other one, which is I thought quite interesting, was the notion of the steering committee establishing a placeholder for the repository for exemplar projects, so that when we see good examples, we can put them into a place where our community can access them and see them, evaluate them, and learn from them. So those are two ideas that came out in that stream for community outreach. Again, if you think they're good ideas, give them a good rating. If not, don't. But if you have any other thoughts that might be in the way of advice to the steering committee on how it might reach out more effectively to the community, then that's what we're interested in. Are we done with that one? Yep, continuing on. Next slide. In the end, I didn't even politely have a, there we go from this slide. So the next phase then is for us to now get Alexa to share the results and to see what your voting showed up and what ideas and how it was together. Has there been any, I haven't really heard from any of our remote users, are they still being monitored? Is anything coming out of that? Obviously satisfied the questions.
This is, I'm still waiting on this. So that's why. Oh. However, it is. The very first one? Yep. Yeah. Okay. All right.
So we saw this one earlier. Did you want to make any comment on this, Ian?
They're all equally important, that's my conclusion.
Okay. Okay, so these are the streams, and it's a similar model. So again, yeah, extension projects was not strongly supported at the moment because for the same reason, I guess, that the desire to consolidate what we have. So that's probably reasonably informative. I'm not sure, but this is flagging slightly the ontologies BSPD. I think that's probably does a term ontology scare people? An ontology is simply it's a term coming out of linguistics. It's a domain of knowledge. So you might have an ontology that relates to chess playing, for example, which is all to do with the language that a chess expert or a chess enthusiast uses, or any domain you can think of can have an ontology. So that's all that an ontology is. In our domain, it's understanding the way in which we talk about infrastructure or road. Yeah.
Just want to let everyone know that there is an NCHRP project in advancing data ontologies for the transportation community in the West. That's our first foray, not really the first foray within the current, the ontologies, and I think it's very specifically for this work because now it's relatable to most of the community. Just wanted to let everyone know this. It's about to start next month.
Okay, so strong support generally. Next one. Strong support for technical development, and then strongish support for the other areas. Okay, were there any suggestions for, did we actually ask that question? No, okay, okay. We are interested in, if you think there are other streams that we've overlooked, then I'm interested in that feedback, but I'm not sure that there would be. Has anyone got a view that there's some stream of activity that we've missed out on? No? Okay. So let's move on.
We did. Okay, never mind. We did.
Oh, okay. training streams, dictionary streams. You've probably got those covered, I suspect. New vendors enter the marketplace all the time, need to practice, need a practice in place to ensure that vendors enter into agnostic open platforms. That's a really an outreach. We also have that stream to do with pilot programs, so that probably addresses that, I think. Does anyone, whoever put that on, do you want to add to it?
That was my comment. I'm not sure it necessarily belongs here, but it just kind of came to me as I questionnaire, so
Enter into, yes.
self-explanatory, I guess, but maybe it doesn't fit in this context.
Yeah. We certainly need to encourage software vendors to embrace ISC as a tool.
Two examples of that for the groups and structures pool fund. There is a group working with that pool fund, Jeff Roulette, coordinates that activity along with HDR. So that's a local example. Internationally, we have a general assembly which we invite any vendor to participate in terms of ISC implementation. So it's an open door. The last general assembly, I think, had 162 vendors. Just to give you some idea in terms of reaching all the big global players, as you can imagine, the Triples, the Esris, the Oracles, the Autodesk, the Bentley, but more specifically, some of the national players like Microsoft in Italy, for example, we do a lot with these Azure roads people, so at all levels we might have participation.
Okay. Use through the construction phase and creation of the digital as-built file. That's part of the life cycle operation. And it's certainly part of the use cases. Development. It may be really good already, I'm sure that means. In addition to BIM GIS integration, is obviously important to key standards that DOTs need for the fundamental operation. It's very important. We all live in an environment, operate in an environment where there is many national standards, local, regional standards that need to be adhered to, and ISC needs to be, or ISC is just one platform. I'd like to think that ISC sits in the center in some sense, and it allows you to operate within the constraints of those other standards, but still use the ISC as a basic way of modeling and representing data. And of course, using the BSDD and the other tools to help to interface to those other standards. Vendor engagement and support. Yeah, we have one of the streams is the piloting project, so we want to see that engaging with vendors and in the use of in the application of their software products to real projects and reporting on that. Design, construction, purchase process, well, that's again part of the life cycle development that is important. Inspection and asset is a part of the final phase. So I'm not sure these are separate streams, but they're certainly all areas that need some focus.
Jim, I think that's more of a.
Sorry?
It's more about use cases than.
Yeah. But,
So
then,
it's already covered.
but we've got them, they're documented, so we can.
Yes. No. Okay, so. That doesn't seem to work here, but that's okay. It works, okay, as long as the online people can hear it, because I know you can hear me. But it's already covered on one of the streams through the use cases, I think.
Yeah. Most of the Okay, thank you very much. Next. Sorry, what about the shooters?
I think you're skipping a couple of them. About one more?
Okay. All right, so the first one got strong support. Second one likewise. It's interesting, you were voting more strongly for some of the ones that were not strongly supported previously, but that's fine. Next one. They're all getting a reasonable number of votes, so obviously this community sees most of these as being relevant at one stage or another. So that's good to know if there's a strong commitment. I think the strongest ones are probably already covered, but I need to go back and see how they fit in with some of the other priorities. Okay. Other BIM guys. 15 answers. Right, well, that one, the first one is covered in that idea of exemplar projects. A dictionary user guide. Beginning. Dictionary user guide, yes, that's already on the list. Integration with asset management enterprise systems. That's part of the asset operations handover framework project. And so, and I presume that there are lots of enterprise systems that are used that need to be supported, but they're almost on a case-by-case basis. Bill wants to say something.
Yes, question on that. I'm assuming on handing over those assets, there'll be geospatial information as well.
In my view, absolutely, but the project is still in gestation phase, so but that will certainly be an issue. Yeah. Yeah. Cross-border guidance for each agency. Someone to explain that one?
Thanks, Jim. This is Michael. I put that one in, actually the previous one as well, the ghost and we look at integrating our existing systems with IFC and imagine it's an agency by agency crosswalk needed, so maybe general guidance could help. Just as simple as mapping attribute fields.
What do you mean by crosswalk? Is that literally a pedestrian crossing?
I think I learned that term a couple of years ago too. It's equating one field, one system to.
All right. Okay. I was taking it literally as being the thing that I walk across when I'm dodging traffic. Okay. What is an IDS idea, etc. Yes, that's already kind of covered in the user journals. What should I get certified? Why should I get certified? That's an interesting issue. It's something that does need to be explored a bit more to promote the certification process. What's the best elevator pitch to move the needle on an infra BIM? That's promoting adoption within the industry. Linear referencing, so the need to clarify that in the context of IFC and those in particular in this case. Why should I get certified? Well, that comes back to the same question. Source materials, data and information from highway related constituents and manufactured materials. Their certification, physical properties, testing results, including information, etc. That's all about properties. Someone want to elaborate that one? Probably fairly elaborate. But yeah, okay, I can understand it. So, interrelationship of all asset types using IFC representation.
Hold on, Jim, maybe it was online, so I don't know, Jeff, was that a question that someone asked online? Or a comment that was put up by somebody online? No, okay.
I mean, there is an issue around attribute data and property data associated with any product. And I think that's what this is really addressing. And there needs to be a body of work done to really identify what properties are required at different stages in the development of a project and how we handle that. But certainly IFC and use of property sets and the data dictionary provide the tool set to do all of that. But that doesn't give you the answer, that just gives you a mechanism or way of doing it. Interrelationship of all asset types using IFC representation. Someone want to explain what they meant there? That was a Roger, wasn't it?
That was my point. I think this is Roger Grant. What I was thinking about is, you know, working with bridges and understanding that bridges are part of a whole system that most readily connects to roadways, but also there's utilities and lifelines, and then if you're moving on into rail, and even with buildings, I think the idea of where these gaps are and how they connect to each other would be interesting to have some more understanding of, or understanding of where the status of the situation is on being able to model whole systems like that. I think Mike Kennerly told me that, you know, the roads don't stop at the end of this state. They go on to the next state, and another state DOT picks up from there. And so I thought that was really interesting challenge and opportunity to use a standard to help make those connections better.
And obviously the width of the lane changes from state to state, doesn't it? That was Jerry. In Australia, we had the issue of going way back that all of our state rail systems didn't actually connect because they used different rail gauge. So that's a standing joke at our extent. It's been sorted now, but maintenance software data analysis. So that's, I guess it's exploring the issue of maintenance and how that can be managed and giving advice on that, guidance on that. Thank you. Which of these use cases do you think you need first? So, in the GIS, and if the others were very close behind, so. And that's really saying that all three are needed fairly confident, is that right? Yeah. Yeah. Other use cases. Asset management use case. So the handover project is about handing over the data to people of asset management. Maybe this one is dealing with asset management as a operation. I see bridge inspection. They're some of these are very specific. So again, I see the bridge inspection really requires the appropriate property sets to be attached to the entity so that you can record the inspection data, including images and
Hey, Jim, can you hear me?
definition of multi-geometric representation of that question came up. The question. I don't know how widely it's used. I don't know whether you have a view on that, Roger. I'm not sure how many people actually have used multiple geometric representations of entities in IFC, but the schema allows it. So you can have a simultaneous data, very simplified representations or even complex ones. It would be simply associated with the geometry representation with the object. I'm not sure how widely it's implemented. So one of the issues with building, if it is IFC, is that many of the capabilities of IFC are not necessarily supported in file exchange. And so we need to draw that distinction. And if multiple representations is important, then software needs to have support. Vision road, well, that's integration. We talked about that a minute ago. Estimating with connections to specific AI items is called cost estimating. Sorry. Yeah. So that's also that's providing a link to an external cost data, which can be done. Question about that. Design for fabrication, construction, digital as built. Is that a description of the process? Models are just design models. How can I see the incorporated lesson models with asset management or created from survey data to visual service model with mobile LiDAR? That's true. There's no question that an IFC model is can only be built on a design model. You can certainly capture data, LiDAR data, and bring that into an IFC model. So the model itself can incorporate any information you can read to. Utility integration. Yeah, that's maybe some guidance on how to do that, but certainly you can integrate utility data. Does asset handover include the use case for inspection? If not, that use case needs to be discussed. That's a note for that project. And Jeffrey's online, so I'm sure he's filled that one. Performance modeling of assets when integration of constituent materials, data, traffic, climate, weight and motion, etc. I really wish to understand the performance of the highway pavement. Yep. And that's another analysis process of the model. So it's like, okay. Any comments on any of those? Yeah.
Hey, Jim, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All these are going to
I don't think anybody in the room can hear me.
Okay, which
So does that mean they can't hear us?
I think so.
probably reflects the advice. So operation handover is seen as being significant importance. Environmental management and landscape less so, but I do get some roles. Yes. Okay, thank you. Carbon reduction management on delivery infrastructure projects. That's that is actually I'm not sure it's actually a project at this stage, but there's certainly a lot of interest in that area. I'm suggesting that knowing the details of the one thing. I see got highway related source constituent materials such as aggregates, substructure materials, cement. Right. I think that's already covered in IFC 4.3. There's a very rich.
Hello, Jim, can you hear me? Hello. Okay. Okay, let me step back for a moment. I've been trying to, I can answer a few of the questions from earlier, or some of those suggestions. One, multiple geometric representations. Technically, it is possible. Technically, it has been possible for a while. For versions IFC 2x3 and IFC 4, BSI and the vendors agreed that we would limit implementations to only one geometric representation, one body representation. And a large part of that is just the logistics of trying to allow or have vendors use multiple representations is a very tall hill to climb. So it is technically possible, but the work hasn't been done to enable it in a lot of different software. There's just other priorities that have been put in place ahead of that. So I think it's an interesting use case to explore, but I think it needs a better definition of context and requirements and needs for it. But I do understand where you're coming from. The other one, and Jim keeps referring to the asset operations handover framework project. So I'm the project lead on that. And the intent is that any data that is needed for any post-construction operation asset management process is handed over in a common way, and that's why we call it the AOH framework, is that we say, okay, we're going to have one or two base MVDs that can transfer this information from the end of the construction process or project delivery process to the owner operator for their use. But if you've ever heard of COBE was the Construction Operations Building Information Exchange. The original idea of doing it was, well, we threw everything in the kitchen sink into that exchange, and then people sort of sorted out what they could use of it. Instead, what we're asking for are people to define what their exact use is of that post-construction data, of that asset management, that operations data. And then they can specify exactly what they want, what subset of the overall amount of information that might have been collected through the project delivery process, and decide how they want to use it for a particular use or purpose. In addition to that, as Jim mentioned before, there's lots of systems out there, lots of platforms for that type of use. And we want to make sure that we are able to deliver that information, not just in terms of an IFC format, but also if there are alternative formats that are necessary in order for that information to be consumed. So you could look at things like bridge inspection as being one of those asset operation handover use cases, along with a lot of these other different types of operations, maintenance, larger asset management opportunities. So that I just wanted to cover.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks for that clarification. I knew it was technically there, but I wasn't quite sure. I have multiple representations.
Yeah, I mean, I think it falls along the line with this idea of design to design transfer of information. It's not easy. In fact, it's very, very difficult. And there's already discussions with the next generation of IFC of how that would be possible of doing it. And it's not a trivial ask. Not that it's impossible, but it's not trivial. So it may take more time to get that done.
Bill wants to jump in.
Hi, Jeff, this is Bill Pratt, Connecticut DOT. Obviously, that's a high interest to us at DOT and others on some of these committees. Just a couple quick questions. You know, I guess we could be looking for opportunities of capturing, you know, assets that are included in a project earlier than post. Because we want to notify those assets that they're, you know, they're programmed for a project. This way, folks like maintenance and others could be made aware of that. But again, just throwing some things out there for thought. Also, you know, we're doing some things right now in, you know, in our design area where we're putting intelligent information on our features. And, you know, just extending that for scans like cost items and, you know, harvesting quantities in our design models, which we could do obviously pre-IFC conversion, right? But then we're also incorporating schema information in here so it fits proper into their authoritative asset system. Just throwing that out there, maybe looking for a comment.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's definitely opportunities for everyone to learn from the progress and the things that have been done on the vertical side of things up to date. So when it comes to things like, you know, calculating quantities, you know, doing quantity takeoffs, doing costing, that type of thing. There are lots of examples of that that have already been accomplished with IFC on the building side. So I think it's a matter of translating that information for the infrastructure domains use. And so I think that goes back into this idea of, you know, knowledge. How do we pass that knowledge along, either through these, you know, guides or white papers, or, you know, as we move into these developing these use cases, and not unlike the BIM for Bridges and Structures project is, you know, how do we get the information to everyone so that they understand not just how it had or can be used, but how it has been used. And we can narrow that gap. I don't want anybody to feel like they're reinventing the wheel every time they come up with a use case, because I think a lot of cases it's also sort of translating what we've already been doing for a while now into this particular domain, so and this particular set of domain experts.
That's good news. Thank you.
And Jeff and Jeff, and the property says for cost and charge codes, pay codes, whatever, it's already in the IDM. The BIM for Bridges is running. So those properties are already covered in them somewhere. So like Jeff said, it's a matter of trying to understand what has been done so that we don't try to reinvent the wheel, but that information was already put into the IDM and Bridge because that information is needed for bidding anyway. So just want to let everybody know.
Thank you for that. I just want to reinforce that comment that there's a lot of experience already in the use of IFC within the building domain and even the infrastructure for that matter. It's a growing body of knowledge. So we do have resources to build on. So someone talked to me about underground services associated with a road. There's no reason why that can't be handled in IFC because we have a long history of handling service reticulation systems in the building and across the site. So applying that in a linear context is not a big ask, but it does need some careful thought by domain experts and actually do that, and whether there are whether there need to be further concepts introduced into the IFC schema to handle that. But my my sense is that there's lots of past experience and need to bring that to the table before we dive off and try and reinvent the wheel, so to speak. So that's, and that's a challenge, I guess, and that's actually a good challenge for the steering committee to be on top of that and to guide the community through those different stages. And the design guide, even guidelines will be a part of that. This last one is an interesting one, because I think before the design to future design, obviously we obviously use past structures in roads and we extend them, widen them, whatever, and being able to use the information from that was generated during the construction of the original road in that later stage is an important use case that needs to be thought about. Absolutely. I was also going to add one thing to Jeff's comment about the asset operations handover. The first phase of that project is really needs input from the infrastructure side to identify what are good use cases or the best use cases to use to inform the development of that framework in the initial phases. It's going to be the project won't just end with the initial phase one. It'll then develop into an infrastructure-based project, which will further refine it. But we do need your expertise, according to each one of you, your expertise to come into that project and to help us identify what are the strategically important use cases that will help to establish a good base framework. Is that a fair enough comment?
And I have a question for Jeff, since he's the lead for that project. And so if the project's been approved, it just means funding too, right? It has limited funding.
The activity proposal.
Yes, so the activity proposal was approved by the BSI community, so the governance committees, the standards committee. What we're currently doing is formulating the project plan. In order for the project to actually move forward, we have to have it fully funded. And right now, our funding goal is about 300,000 euros. We do have the activity proposal is publicly available, and we can give everyone a link to that. And it sort of outlines what the scope of the project is. I'm currently working on the project plan. I might be willing to share drafts of that for people who are interested. But so far, we've received funding from Statsbygg, who is the Norwegian equivalent of the US GSA. We've received funding from Trafikverket, which is the Swedish road authority. And we've received some funding from the Finnish transportation agency. But we're still a long ways off. That totals about $40,000 right now. And we've already spent the money for developing the building systems equipment maintenance use case based on Statsbygg's contribution. So we're a ways off. But we will be talking about the project in Rome, and we have been talking about it in past summits too, and those sessions are recorded.
Well, I could, if there is interest, I could also add that Jeff mentioned COBE, which is something that's been used on the vertical side for passing data from construction over to operations. It is available for use. It could be a starting point, perhaps, that could lead to the broader objectives that this project is. This is intended to do a broader view of asset operations and what's needed in this new project. But there are some ways that could potentially lead to experimentation that might support the asset operations handover project and help you see the value in it.
So Roger, so the format of Kobe, is that basically an Excel file or a tabular file?
So I can respond to that. Essentially, Cobia was originally specified was two possible exchanges. One is through a spreadsheet version, but it was also based on an IFC mapping. So all of the semantics, all the relationships, things like the GUIDs, all that is based on the IFC schema, but it can either go out as an IFC file or it can be exported as tables. And for the AOH project, we intend to keep going down that route, saying, well, if an asset information system or maintenance system or whatever can receive an IFC file, great. If it can't, then we want to know what are the optimal versions or optimal formats for them to receive that information. Is it an XML file? Is it a CSV file? Is it what?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities there. Obviously, every state over here is probably something a little different. A lot of us use Esri, but there's others. There's also, has there been any talk about utilizing FME at all? Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with it, and I think the thing to remember is what Building Smart is providing are completely vendor agnostic standards. We don't build a standard or a process around any particular vendors. So yes, I'm well aware of what Safe Software does with FME, but what we would be providing is a means for anyone to use any platform to do those types of translations. FME is a good example of one that does that. They're using the schema, but they're then using their own internal technology to make those links between two different platforms or a translation from one format to another.
I could, Jeff, or it's Roger, I could add to that just in support of IFC that the uses of FME I've seen have taken a proprietary model, use the IFC file conversion and then use that to bring it into GIS. And that's a way to use the application, but also use the standard to make the connection. So that's a good use of IFC, I believe.
Okay, should we keep on moving through this? So we've done this one, I think, haven't we? Sorry, I'm lost thread there a little bit. So it's weighing most of these quite strongly. Okay, let's see if there's any other suggestions. Capture future asset management requirements during design. And that's what we've just been talking about. Meeting the needs of digital as built, as legal documents signed and sealed models. Okay. So, an interesting one. Shareable, customizable training materials. I think that's a kind of a given if you're going to have training materials that can be widely available. Planners using data. I want to explain that one a bit more. Yep.
Thanks, Jim. This is Michael, Minnesota. Planners end up being a key stakeholder for asset management. And they don't understand IFC, like maybe the potential. Using more data that hasn't been created yet at an enterprise level.
Can you explain what the plan is?
Planner is a, kind of the yin to engineers and state DOT, I guess.
Yeah, so if I may, Jen, planning is a term that it's different from the vertical world. And for us, that is part of our environmental requirements to be planning with the community and all the stakeholders. And so the type of information that goes into that kind of use case is, how you are impacting the land around you and the people around you. So that is the type of information. And so having high visualization of what the project is going to do is really important. So it just to put it into context for what we do. That's what that means.
Well, like Alexa, I guess environmental maybe is preliminary design, but I'm thinking planners in terms of aggregating network-wide data or funding for capital project plans.
Yeah.
Right. So what Chuck was talking about, the handover, obviously, the other use case would be, what do you need back? Right, so how is it going to be maintained during operations? And so what information are you going to need to complete the trip back? And that's what also Bill was talking about, right? So if you define the type of information that you need, it's just another delivery requirement, right? So I think it can be separating, if possible, it's just nobody has to find the information requirements for that.
Yeah, I see it as, IFC is your medium to move between your as-built into your asset management system that is probably going to be at least coupled with your GIS, your enterprise GIS, that then the planners are used to continue to consume more GIS than purely design problems. So you have to feed the entire ecosystem. You can't just drop off the cliff. But I think GIS will be your delivery point for planners. As long as GIS can consume everything coming out of your maintenance management system or your as-well, it should be. But we should be clear that is needed.
Yeah, and they have their own set of use cases, really bottom line. That like what these folks are referring to in terms of network evaluation, prioritizing projects, and then that flows into selection of more detailed projects, and then back again through the life cycle. So it's really it's that piece of the getting asset management and network data to people that are making large scale prioritization decisions, funding decisions, that kind of thing.
Might be bold enough to suggest an extension of that thinking, which I think implied in what you said. And I think this is a lack, it's been something that I've been concerned about, thought about in the building domain for many years. But there needs to be a way of, in the early design phase or planning phase, we often take into account lots of needs, lots of requirements in architecture briefing, as a very similar concept. And then we go ahead and design and forget about the brief. And we assume that the brief is being satisfied by what we deliver at the end. It would be really nice if that information at the beginning of the process that comes out of the planning process is actually held in some way. So that at the end you can say, hey, we didn't deliver that deliverable, we forgot to protect the flora and fauna when we built this road, or we neglected to understand the impact of the new roads on the traffic pattern, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And we haven't succeeded, and that gives us or we have succeeded, and that gives us something to you better that kind of do that process. I think that's actually very important.
It is, and just to continue connecting, in the United States, there are federal requirements around this process that ask the states to have a 4-year plan and then a long-term plan. So it really is a good,
It possibly doesn't fit under this category. It might actually be a project in its own right to address that mechanism and how we handle that. I think that's also relevant in the vertical domain, satisfaction of briefs and so on. Okay. So in those 3 words, there's actually a lot of rich ideas. I'll try and hold those in my brain as we go forward. Ability to edit and show that edits have been made to imported files is tracking changes during the process. I think is important. It's metadata isn't about who's made what changes. Is that what we're thinking there? Not sure where that came from. Achieving certification of multiple applications use asking for more specifically use extensions. Yeah, so that's a challenge. I mean, Building Smart has a certification process. They're currently in the process of defining that in the context of infrastructure. That's an urgent need to be able to start to certify the implementations that we're seeing. Ian wants to say something.
Yeah, I just want to introduce another terminology to everyone here, which is the term validation. So I think it's important that we realize that it's not just about asking the software vendors to certify how they implement IFC. That's a badge of good housekeeping that you would expect to want on the tools you're using. But we have now prototype and do have up and running first part of our IFC validation service. So this is a tool, online tool that will be available to you as users. So you can validate an IFC file. Does it have everything in it that you've asked for example? So if a designer makes a submission to a DOT, you can run a check that all the information requirements that you specified have been included in the file. So that's called the validation service. It's one level lower than certification, but it's going to be a really, really useful tool. And the validation service, every time you run those validation tests, you're actually giving the vendor a score against their certification. So we're tying the 2 together. So we're reinventing that whole certification process. We're right in the middle of it. It's all pointing in the right direction. The vendors actually like it because it's holding them to accountability, as you would expect with a certification process. But more important, it's helping them make their software better and achieve that higher level. So those things are happening now, and that validation service will be available for every user.
Will the validation and scoring be presented to the consumers, the customers that use that software, so we can know, company A scores this well versus company B, so when we're making selection decisions, we can understand that?
I don't know, but I agree that that would be the ideal situation in terms of transparency. And normally Building Smart is very transparent. What we are imagining that there may be some level of analytics that we could sell back to the certification candidates, meaning the software companies. But certainly from a user community point of view, A, it's free, and B, we want to make it as transparent as we can.
Great, thank you.
Oh, Ian, if I kind of add to that, I want to make sure everybody understands too that what Ian is talking about is it's a mix of technical validity and also content validity. And a file could be technically correct, but maybe lacking things, which may not be the vendor's problem. It may be that the end user did not have the proper information in there, or that the end user did something custom or override default settings in a way that quote unquote broke the file, right? So I think we need to also, as end users, understand that there's a culpability on the end user's part as much as the vendor's part.
That's an excellent point, and I absolutely agree. I think that's part of the transparency, right?
Okay, thank you. Next. White papers. Okay. So the role of inside that is strongly supported, all of them very strongly supported. Yeah, good. They're all halfway, so they're all have strong support one way or another. System models, managing survey data from ISC. That's interesting. So that's in fact got quite the same rating. So yes, defining spatial questions up to work, managing on-site data. That's very good. Other ideas. So we're talking about white papers. How can I sign and seal my IC models as contract deliverable? I think that's part of the contract guidelines. White paper, but it certainly has to be addressed as a specific issue. Does IC support simulation? Simulation, I'm not sure what's meant by that. Simulation is an analysis, so you should be able to take your IFC model at whatever stage in the process, import it into software that simulates its performance in some sense. So I think that's an analysis process, unless I'm misunderstanding what you mean. So the answer is a definition, yes, provided simulation software that does the simulation we want. Integration of emitting utilities. I can guess what that means. Can someone clarify that?
It's similar to the previous documents prior to a project beginning. Sometimes there's utility coordination needed with other entities that need to be allow to accommodate a roadway and integration of that data before, during, after. Yeah, maybe already covered.
So when you say integrating and emitting utilities, that's really just another simulation example. Am I, right?
That would be integrating data from multiple owners. Transportation doesn't own every utility in the area. There could be tens or hundreds of other utilities that may be interested in joining IFC. I'm not sure. That's
Right, okay. So by utilities, you're referring to water installation or drainage or those sorts of utilities. So, and
fiber.
Yeah.
Yes. Pipelines.
I was struck by the word permitting.
Well, right, yeah, permitted to enter the right of way.
All right, thank you. Yeah, okay, got it. AOH, we covered that. What is the building smart data position and how do I use it? Covered that. What are the advantages and risks of using a model as a legal document? I think that again we can cover by the contracts white paper. How do I create it? But these are all good because they feed into those ideas. How do I create a digital twin using IFC? That's a big one, which I think is part of our future thinking about IFC. I have my personal views about that, but I think we're still on that journey. Development of digital as-built. We probably touched on that one already. Okay, thank you. Community outreach, both of those got really strong support. Are there any others? It's interesting to me, just as an aside, before I'll just go on, most of what's come out of this voting, and most of the ideas have got more than 50% support. And so, you know, what it's telling us is that they're all good ideas. But I'm interested to see what additional things come through. Next one, probably doing more. So what other ideas for community outreach activities? Example project should include sufficient details in duplication or adaptation by our own agencies. Yeah. There's obviously legal implications there, perhaps, but certainly as much transparency and reuse of data as possible. Publish case studies. Case study staying as a pilot project.
I think so.
Include multiple project types with minor include portfolio for pilot.
Jim, we can explain this one again.
Yeah.
So some of the work roadway projects do are very simple in terms of the data. However, if you covered over the first day or two, it's where majority of the ratio of contracts get done. So maybe it's not a great pilot to have one of those very small projects. However, you could bundle 40, 50, 80 very small projects and show how that data aggregates comes together.
So you're talking, if I'm understanding you, you're talking about local road type projects.
No,
So
trunk highway, state road construction. Or contracted maintenance.
yeah. Okay. Share pilot projects and local city and country officials. So is that the required to reach out to those kind of end users? What they're saying? Okay. I think that's it. Well done. Thank you for all of that. And it'll take a while for us to digest that, but I think we need to wrap up the session. And Michael has opted to do that. But what needs to come out of this now is to hand over these ideas to Mike Kennedy to take them forward into something.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for the input. It was fascinating actually to sit and listen to the ideas and have Jim walk us through that. What I took away is there's a lot of information here. I hope it can be synthesized into something. I'm sure it can be that Mike can present. Mike's probably got this all processed in his head already and just at any rate, I want to just share a little bit about Friday, because Friday is kind of an interesting day. Friday morning is from 8 to 9 is the J-Stand meeting, and it's our first time as a committee, as I said, mostly in person. And we're gonna work internally. There will be a virtual option for J-Stand members, but it's just our committee first thing. At 9 o'clock, Roger Grant and the NIMS folks are going to provide a presentation until 9:45. And it's listed in the program. And then at 10 o'clock after the morning tea will be kind of an industry input, but really this group's input and the folks online input into where J-Stand is headed and really getting feedback on what we can do. as a subcommittee to support these collective efforts. So it's really important that you bring your ideas. We'll either just do it ad hoc and take notes or possibly set up a Mentimeter type approach. Either way, there will be an opportunity for y'all to provide some input, which is very important to us, because as I've said earlier, it's still a little bit fuzzy precisely what it is our charge is, but it's getting clearer, and this is helping me, and I hope helping the rest of you understand a little bit more about where we're headed. And then Friday from 11 to 12 is a final hour with Jay Stan and the Building Smart team to give Mike a chance and us a chance to be sure that we understand what the priorities are. And we can fully prepare Mike and so forth for Roman, only 2 weeks away. So that's kind of a closed session. I think it's closed. More than anything, this was everybody's chance to provide that input, and I don't want to dilute that last hour and kind of have a whole bunch of other ideas reinserted and further complicate what needs to be done on a fairly short turnaround to prepare for Rome. So that was the idea behind this. This was our first shot at this, and I know we will learn from it. We'll get better in future subsequent roadmap type preparation meetings. Hopefully we will have more states involved, as I said earlier. That's really important to me and important to the spirit of the AASHTO effort, and Jay Stan's effort is engaging other states and engaging everybody. So that said, I think it's me standing between you and lunch, and I'm been the first guy at lunch the last couple of days. I don't want to get in the way of lunch. So unless there are questions, Penelope.
I just have a comment. I want to talk a little bit. You mentioned not reinventing the wheel. And of course, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, and we want to be conscious of that. But on the flip side, as we let the ideas that we discussed today percolate and think about what we want to send forward to the roadmap to the international movement, I want to be careful not to throw things away too quickly because they look like other things. I want to make sure that we have the wheels in the wheel. So let's say we did this, we're doing this. Let's really honor sort of what we're thinking about here and make sure that we get. I mean, it's just a piece of what everyone else is doing. Let's make sure that we're not, throwing things away too quickly because they look similar.
Good point. Thank you. Any other questions, Jim?
I just want to make a comment. I mean, I take that point and it's very important, but yeah. I also want to just remind you that the system is still open. So I'd encourage you, if you have further thoughts, the next 24 hours of work, feel free to add them in, or even to go in there and add some expansion or clarification to things that are there. I've attempted to understand them. They're kind of in my brain. I can't guarantee to correctly interpret them further down the track. So if you can add